Not yet. Not yet.
Mr. Whitman, do you have the video ready to go?
Yes, sir. We're ready.
We'll
Thank
be
you, sir.
ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Video ready to go?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the
5.
District 1 Property Tax Assessment Town Hall, sponsored by District 1 Commissioner Ms. Bridget Thorne. Participants will be here tonight to be able to hear from some of our assessors and the experts in review of the 2025 notices, homestead exemptions, and the appeals process. Attendees will also get an opportunity to get new information or more information about property assessments and also understand some of the changes that are taking place. So now I will turn it over to Commissioner Thorne, who will kick off the town hall.
Thank you, Regina. Welcome, everybody, to the town hall. We decided to hold these town halls just to inform the citizens of Fulton County. We've had a lot of questions, a lot of people asking, and the whole tax process is a very confusing process. So hopefully tonight you'll leave here with your questions answered and a plan on what to do about your taxes. Certainly, I am not the expert in this field, but fortunately, we have Mr. Roderick Conley joining us. He is our chief appraiser for Fulton County for the past 2 years. He's highly respected in the field of property assessment. He has 20 plus years of experience, and his influence extends beyond the local level as a third-year member of the IAAO, International Association of Assessing Officers Board of Directors, representing Region 2. He studied at Piedmont University, where he received a bachelor's degree in business management. He holds several designations, including the IAAO Assessment Administration Specialist, AAS, and the Residential Evaluation Specialist, RES, along with the Georgia Certified Appraisers, GCA, designation and the Appraiser 4 certification from the DOR. His leadership journey includes previously serving on the executive board of the Southeast District Representative of the Georgia Association of Assessing Officials, GAAO, from 2016 to 2020. And joining him tonight on his staff, he has Brian E. Gardner. He's the appraiser manager of Fulton County Board of Assessors for 30 years. He has a BA in economics from UGA, an MBA from Kennesaw State, an MPA from Kennesaw State as well. He's a certified public manager, CPM, the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, University of Georgia. He has a graduate certificate in planning and economic development at Georgia State University, and he's an appraiser for Georgia Department of Revenue. We also have James Kevin Whitman. He's the Deputy Chief Appraiser at the Fulton County Tax Assessor's Office. He oversees the Field Book, GIS, and Homestead divisions, provides leadership, workflow coordination, and operational management. He has over 25 years of experience in the property tax assessment field. He's a certified appraiser 4 by the Georgia Department of Revenue, and he's a subject matter expert in Georgia homestead exemption law. And finally, we have Johns Creek's Michael Fitzgerald. He's a resident of Fulton County for 40 plus years. He served 2 terms on the Fulton Board of Assessors. That's 8 years, and we just put him in for another 4. He has an extended education via classes at the Georgia Department of Revenue and County Board of Assessors Workshop, Specialized Assessments, Georgia Assessment Administration, Exempt Properties, attended multiple DOR Carl Vinson Institute of Government conferences, Current Ad Valorem Ethics and Trends, CAVEAT, C-A-V-E-A-T. He significantly contributed to Fulton County's performance review to the Department of Revenue. He currently serves on the Fulton County T-SPLOST 1 and T-SPLOST 2 Citizens Oversight Committee. He has 20 years in hardware technology with IBM, Tandem Computers, and 25 years of software with Harbinger, Newbridges, holding nationwide responsibilities. He's a founder, owner, CEO of EZ EDI Technology, electronic data interchange, conversion, translation, communication software. He attended Emory University, Gazetta School of Business Executive MBA program, and he has multiple degrees in business administration and psychology from West Virginia University. So we certainly do have the experts here, and there may be some questions that may be very, very specific or unique to your situation. If we can't answer those here, we'll have our team get back to you with answers and specifics. And as I know, all of them are willing to meet with anybody, take a phone call. They are readily accessible at any time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our experts.
Okay, would you like me to go first?
Sure.
I guess I'm an expert. Thank you, Commissioner Thorne, and your team for inviting the Fulton County Tax Assessor's Office to help educate your constituents in the District 1, as well as others, on the assessment process and answer questions. Starting out, we're going to be touching on the roles. We're going to try to explain what the Board of Assessors do. And just to be aware, we are tightly bound by the laws dictated by the State of Georgia Code 4856. We have very little latitude in how and what we do that isn't dictated by some law. Some more background: we are not taxing authorities. Many people confuse the Board of Assessors with the taxing entities, which are the county commissions, school boards, and municipals. To give you a feel for the scope of our challenge, there are 360,000 plus residential parcels in Fulton County and 24,000 commercial industrial parcels, along with personal property assignments also. It tells you it's a big job. And when you're dealing with that much minutia, sometimes there are mistakes, and the good news is there's a clearly defined way to address these anomalies. I hope you heard from the introductions the outstanding and deeply experienced professionals that we have, noticing the MBAs and the Certified Appraiser 4s, the highest training on assessments offered by the Georgia Department of Revenue. They are subject experts in their field of responsibility. What we'll cover will include legislative changes, and there have been some big ones in the last couple of years, and you may have noticed those on your notification forms that changed based upon state law. We'll give you some information on major dates and timelines, including appeal periods and deadlines. Some of you may have already seen those on your notification. One side of the format and layout of the modifications is totally dictated by the state. We're also going to talk to a little bit about process, how we go about appraising parcels. And here's the one that everybody's interested in: homestead exemptions. We have all kinds of exemptions for Fulton County: veterans, disabled, age-related, income-related, and just being a homeowner and living in your home qualifies you for certain exemptions. Make sure you fill that out. You'll also hear some requirements for filing. And here's the big one. There's going to be a surprise. Mr. Whitman is going to tell you that there's going to be some extensions on filing for homestead exemptions. So you want to get out a piece of paper and be ready for that. So we're going to also explain finally where to get help. We've got several remote offices. We've got a central office, and we've got phone calls and websites and everything to help you out. And we'll talk about that. So thank you. And let me hand the program over to Fulton County Chief Appraiser, Roger Connolly. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. It seems like you covered everything, so we may end this town hall pretty soon here. Thank you, Commissioner Thorne, for your leadership throughout the county and the district that you represent. Again, Mr. Fitzgerald, also thank you outside of your leadership, just to continue support that you offer myself and the staff of the Board of Assessors. I will also take this opportunity to go ahead and thank Mr. Whitman for his leadership of his support service division, and Mr. Garner and his leadership in residential. So thank you all for your contributions. What we're here tonight to talk to you guys about is about the 2025 assessment notices. Some of you guys may have already received it, but as Mr. Fitzgerald has alluded to, there are also some good news that you will be hearing today as it relates to the homestead filing. At the Board of Assessors, we build on a foundation of value, service, and trust. So let's start, thank you, sir, with telling you a little bit about the Board of Assessors itself. It's a 5-member board that's appointed by the Board of Commissioners, and they are responsible for identifying and appraising all taxable properties that's real and personal, real being residential and also commercial throughout Fulton County. And ultimately, it results in a compilation of what we call a tax digest, that is a requirement to submit to the state annually each year. With that, they also are responsible for setting policies and procedures throughout the office to ensure efficiency. And last but not least, one of their ultimate responsibilities is the appointment of the chief appraiser position, who oversees the day-to-day operation. You see at the bottom, there's a list of our members. Ms. Pam Smith serves as chair. Lee Morris serves as vice chair, while we have Mr. Fitzgerald with us today. And the list ends with Mr. London and Ms. Kaplan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we are comprised of four divisions. And so Mr. Whitman, who's with us today, serves as the Deputy Chief Appraiser for our Support Service Division. Again, as suggested earlier, it includes the GIS Division, Field Book, and Homestead. Ms. Tara Parker serves as the Deputy Chief Appraiser for the Residential Division, Curtis Broden for the Commercial and Industrial, and Dwayne Peatney serves as the Deputy Chief Appraiser for both Personal Property and the Administrative Division. Let's get right into it. So as you may know, this may have been one of the most comprehensive legislative seasons that we've seen in a while in the tax assessment realm. It started in 2024 with the passing of House Bill 581. 581 does three interesting things. It introduced a statewide homestead float exemption, but keep in mind, you'll hear more about it maybe later on in the presentation. There's no action on your part, meaning there's no filing that you have to complete or application you have to complete in order to take advantage of the statewide floating homestead. It is automatic. You will receive, you may know that there's certain jurisdictions that currently already have a local floating homestead. And so you will receive the most advantageous exemption to you, whether it's the state or the local exemption. There is also modifications to what you may understand to be the 299C provision. Some folks call it the 3-year lock. In the past, by proxy of filing an appeal and having a hearing or a decision rendered, you receive what is termed as a 3-year lock. The law has been amended. 299C provision will be implemented only when there is a reduction in the value this coming year. Last but not least, and what we've also alluded to earlier in the presentation, is your notice of assessment that you may have already received will be formatted a little differently. I want to be clear, it was not a decision that counties made. It was a state design format of the notice. So we did not have any authority as the county as to how it will be formatted. But House Resolution 1022 was a complement bill that allowed or created the pathway for House Bill 581. Now, the legislators were not finished. So in 2025 legislative season, they followed with House Bill 92. House Bill 92 was intended to be a cleanup bill for House Bill 581 as they started receiving feedback from not only counties, but also feedback from taxpayers throughout the whole state. And one of the biggest benefit and result of House Bill 92 to you will be the fact that you will have an extended period of time as it relates to filing for your homestead. I do not want to steal Mr. Whitman's thunder, so I will leave it at that. But I will go on to say, what brought a small challenge to us is the fact that it became effective on January 1, 2025, retroactively, although it was actually signed and put into law on April 1st of 2025. Next slide. So for your convenience, if you have the time, this is a overview of the legislative changes that has happened for both 2024 and 2025, mainly outlining those changes for 581 and House Bill 92. It is available on our website. You can see at the bottom, the website is www.fultonassessor.org. And so you will be able to find that link should you have the time or need to reference back to some of the legislative changes that has happened for the legislative seasons of 24 and 25. This would be a good time to show you a very short video. It's about 3 or 4 minutes, but it'll give you a very broad understanding of the process from beginning to end.
It's time for your annual Fulton County Property Assessment. This assessment reflects the fair market value of your property. Your notice of assessment will arrive in the mail unless you opt into email delivery. You can also view your assessment online at www.fultonassessor.org. Remember, your assessment notice is not a bill. Tax bills will be issued in the fall. Be sure to review your assessment notice carefully. Is your property information accurate? Are all of your exemptions included? New state laws mean there will be some differences this year. On your assessment notice, in homestead exemptions, and in rules governing exemptions. New floating homestead exemption. Homestead exemptions are a tool to provide property tax relief for qualifying homeowners. State lawmakers added a new floating homestead exemption. Floating homestead exemptions protect property owners if their property values increase rapidly. The amount can change every year to help with increases of property values. The new exemption is in addition to the floating exemption Fulton County has offered for more than 20 years. Property owners will automatically get whichever exemption saves them the most money. If you already have a basic homestead exemption, you don't have to apply separately for a floating exemption. It will be automatically applied. There is also a change in the application period for homestead exemptions. Usually, the deadline to seek a homestead exemption that will apply in the current tax year is April 1st. Under the new law, if you owned your home on January 1st but haven't applied for an exemption, you can do that now during the 45-day assessment appeal period. If you acquired your home after January 1st but haven't yet applied for a homestead exemption, you can apply at any time, but it won't go into effect until next year. Even with many changes in the assessment process, property owners still have the right to appeal. Appeals can be filed for 45 days after the date printed on your notice. One new change is the appeals process. If you appeal, your property value can be frozen for 3 years, but only if your appeal successfully reduces your valuation. You can appeal if you don't think your fair market value is accurate. Your valuation is very different from similar properties nearby. Your property is tax exempt, such as being owned by a nonprofit. You didn't get the exemptions you should have, or your land should get a discount under the Conservation Use Valuation Assessment or Forest Land Protection Act. You can file an appeal by mail online or in person. Another change property owners will see is that the bottom of your assessment notice will look different. All 18 taxing jurisdictions in Fulton County have certified a rollback rate. That's the tax rate that would generate the same tax revenue as last year, if applied to all properties. The rollback rates for Fulton County, your city, and your school system will appear at the bottom of your assessment notice. This rate does not affect your actual assessment or your tax bill. One thing that has not changed is the commitment of the Fulton County Board of Assessors to provide exceptional customer service to property owners. For more information on property assessments, exemptions, and more, visit www.fultonassessor.org.
Mr. Gardner?
Okay. Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to go over the appraisal timeline that we have. January 1st is the valuation date in the state of Georgia, and that's not a Fulton County policy. It's not a city policy. That is statewide. In every county in the great state of Georgia, the valuation date is January 1st, and your values are established as of January 1st of each year. And that is also when the return period begins. The return is when a property owner can literally state to the county, to the Board of Assessors, what they believe their value should be for that year. April 1st is the return period expiration, and that is for real property and for personal property. April 1st is also the deadline for the homestead exemption for the current year. And July 1st, or no later than July 1st, is usually the deadline for annual notices of assessments to be mailed out to the taxpaying public. September 1st is the deadline for digest submission. The digest is the sum total of all values within the county. Now, the appraisal process contains a number of events: processing of land splits and combinations, data collection and listing of new construction, processing of building permitted activity, sales verification, revaluation of the assessments based on the market, and processing of the appeals. And the annual notice of assessment were mailed out Tuesday, June 17th. There was a 45-day appeal period. Similar to January 1st, the 45 days is not a Fulton County policy. That is a state law. There are 4 levels of appraisal, and that question is on all 4 exams. 45-day window to appeal. And the deadline to appeal the valuations for Fulton County is Friday, August 1st.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk with you just a little bit about homestead exemptions. Hopefully you are aware of homestead exemptions. If not, you may qualify for one if you own and occupy your residence in Fulton County. It's basically a legal provision that reduces the assessed value of your property. The assessed value is 40% of the fair market value. That is the value that is utilized by the tax commissioner's office to calculate tax bills. And so by reducing that assessed value, that homestead exemption is thereby granting you savings as it relates to your property tax bill. As stated, you can apply for homestead exemption at any time, but you do have to apply by April 1st for that exemption to qualify for the current tax year. As also has been alluded to, the filing period is extended for the current year during the assessment period. And so if you received your notice from July the 17th, you have until August the 1st to file for your homestead exemption for 2025. And you did have to own and occupy your property on January 1 of 2025 in order to qualify. We'll talk about this more as well. You can come into any of our offices throughout the county. You can also file online at fultonassessor.org. Using our online portal, If you go into our online portal, you will notice that there are now options to file for 2025 or 2026, depending on when you owned and operate or owned and occupied your home in terms of that January 1 date that we've been talking about. There are a multitude of homestead exemptions available to the citizens of Fulton County. There are basic exemptions. The only qualification, as I have said several times already, is simply to own and occupy that property on January the 1st. We have other special exemptions depending on your age and your income levels that would grant you a higher level of exemption when you reach those milestones. Additionally, we have exemptions that we call special exemptions for disabled veterans, the surviving spouse of a veteran. We also have it for the surviving spouse of a peace officer or a firefighter that's killed in the line of duty. We also have a low income, or what's sometimes referred to as a poverty exemption. The key to this exemption is that the federal adjusted gross income of all of the residents at that household has to be under a certain threshold. And so whenever you apply for that exemption, you answer certain questions, supply certain documentation as you're led there in the online portal or in the office. And depending upon where that income level falls, you would either be granted or not granted that exemption. In terms of what you need to actually apply for a homestead exemption, a valid Georgia driver's license or a valid Georgia identification card, your social security number, registration for the vehicles that are owned by and registered by the property owners and spouses of those that occupy the houses. Again, the requirement for a homestead exemption is you have to own and occupy. So this documentation simply indicates to us that you actually occupy the property for which you are applying. Property in the name of a trust. We have a trust affidavit available at fultonassessor.org that you can fill out when submitting your homestead application. Oftentimes, we'll also request trust documents because, again, you have to own and occupy. So the trust documents many times go a long way in helping us to see that the owner and the occupier of the property is also the heir of the trust or administrator of the trust. We have in the special exemptions outside of the basic requirements that we've already mentioned, there's requirements for your state and federal tax returns. Each homestead exemption is very specific in what's required to qualify for it. Some exemptions ask for your federal income, some ask for state income. Therefore, we ask for both. Again, our goal is to identify the exemption that benefits you the most. You don't have to come to our office or go online knowing what you qualify for. You simply supply the information that is asked either through the online portal or in our office, and then it will guide and direct you from there in terms of which homestead you actually qualify for that benefits you the most. We also ask for a Social Security award letter if you do not file income tax. Your name must be on the deed in order to apply. Again, you have to own and occupy. And so if it's a husband-wife situation and for one reason or another, only one of the spouse's name is on the deed, then that individual specifically has to file for the homestead exemption. If it's in both names, only one is required to apply. But again, you want to provide the information for both individuals. In that case, one may be older, and it also may have some effect on the income requirements. In terms of our online services, again, at fultonassessor.org, you can apply for your homestead or other special homestead exemptions online. Real property returns can be filed using our online portal from January 1 to April 1. Business personal property, aircraft, marine returns, those can also be filed through our online portal, January 1 to April 1. Real and business personal property appeals can be filed using our online portal. And if you're changing your mailing address, that is ultimately, of course, not just for your assessment notice, but also for your tax bill, ultimately for real property, that can be done through our online services as well. In terms of our physical locations, as far as the tax assessor's office, our main location is at 235 Peachtree Street. That is our administrative office, and that's where the bulk of our staff is located. We do have several satellite locations, particularly for filing homestead exemptions, not only at 235 Peachtree Street, but also at 141 at the Government Center downtown. We have 2 offices in the north at Alpharetta on Maxwell Road and the North Service Center on Roswell Road, and then 2 in the south at the Greenbrier Mall, adjacent to the tax commissioner's office there. And then, of course, the South Fulton Service Center on Stonewall Tail Road. I guess at this point, are there any questions?
So Commissioner Thorne, we do have some questions that have come in. If you'd like, I can read some of those, and then we can also try to go to our audience to see if anyone wants to ask their question aloud, unless there's any other information that the panel would like to provide.
Go ahead and ask the ones in the chat, Regina.
All right, we'll start with this one in the chat. What will the board consider when considering an appeal? Are there only certain sources for comparables to other homes on the market that the board will consider? Is there a comprehensive list of what the appeals board will consider on appeal? This one has about 4 or 5 questions within the question. Shall I break it down for those on the panel?
No, Mr. Gardner will respond.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I was actually looking at it as it came through. Essentially, any evidence that supports the value as of January 1st of the year in question is going to be what we're going to consider. But mainly sales of similar homes in the same neighborhood number that happened between January 1st and December 31st of 2024. The property that sold yesterday, that's nice, but that's not going to be factored into the 2025 valuation. It has to be sales that occurred between January 1st and December 31st of the previous calendar year. And also, we know the 3 most important things in real estate are location, location, location. So if you have a property that you'd like to appeal, the house in another neighborhood 5 miles away is not going to be as compelling as the house that sold across the street from you. So you want to be in the same neighborhood, affected by the same market conditions. And that's what we need to see. If there are some special aspects of the property, particularly the physical structure. 1 year I had an appeal where the property caught fire right around Thanksgiving. Well, we kind of need to know that. So anything that's going to the property itself, but what we're doing is looking at the market for that property. Thank you so much for the question.
All right. We have a question from Mac Rowanzak. Mr. Rowanzak, would you like to ask the question on your own, or would you like for me to read this for our panel? All right, I'll just jump in. A good way to make this all easier is to eliminate property taxes, especially after your home is paid off. Anyone want to speak to that?
I will.
That
I'm
would
not
be
quite
great.
sure. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that would be great. Not
Right.
sure it's possible, but it'd be great.
Right. And I was just going to suggest that'd be something that the legislators will have to bring to the table.
All right. Our next question, I applied for homestead back in February and my form said no under homestead. When I called, they said the application hasn't been processed yet. How do I ensure I get this in this tax year? Do I file an appeal or refile for homestead?
Typically, if For instance, somebody files for an application, they file online, they should get a confirmation that the application was actually received by our office. If it has been received and it simply has not been processed yet, as soon as staff is able to work in the system, they will apply the homestead exemption if all of the documentation of the application itself is in order. We sometimes do have homesteads that we are not able to apply simply because of the timeframes that we're working in. Certain parts of the year, staff is locked out of actually working in those or in the system for that purpose. If it was denied for some reason, you would receive a denial letter from our office. In that case, you would want to actually file an appeal if you believe the denial is in error. Otherwise, you can simply contact our office. The number is 404-612-6440. And you can get specifics as to exactly where that homestead exemption is in the process. If you simply want to reach out to me, certainly do that. I can leave my email address in the chat and you can reach out to me about it and I can verify where your application is in the process.
All right, our next question comes from one of our participants. How much does the home exemption typically save? Does it reduce the base rate of the assessed value or is it off the total tax bill amount?
Yeah, as we discussed just a little bit during the slides, the homestead exemption effectively reduces the assessed value. So again, the fair market value is 100% value. 40% of that is the assessed value, and the homestead exemption reduces that assessed value. And it depends upon the details of each one of those exemptions as they're applied to each one of the taxing authorities. Different authorities allow for different amounts based on the legislation that goes along with that homestead exemption. When it comes to a base rate or a base value, for instance, when we're talking about these floating homestead exemptions, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion because people hear that their value can increase more than 3% year after year. And the reality is that what cannot increase more than 3% year after year is that tax-based taxable value as a result of that floating homestead exemption. So regardless of how high the fair market value increases and subsequently the 40% value along with that, the actual value that's used to calculate your tax bill is capped to that 3%. And that's the mechanism whereby taxpayers are protected from spikes in the fair market value of their property.
All right, the next question is from Michelle Valdez. What determines which comps are used for a property?
I'd like to answer that. The comparables for a property are typically associated with the community that it's in. If you're in a subdivision or the property is located in a subdivision, then the comparable is going to be the properties in that same subdivision. The further away you get from a traditional subdivisions, what we call our catch-all neighborhoods, then it's more complicated, but it's still a concept of geography and similar characteristics. So the typical subdivision that most people live in, that's going to be the basis of the sales comparables. And even in the case of mixed use communities, if there is a neighborhood that has townhomes and single family dwellings, the townhomes are compared against the other townhomes. The single family dwellings are compared against the other single family dwellings. It's what's most similar to the property.
Lance Luger would like to know, where is the form to appeal located?
If you go to our website, Fulton Assessor without an S.org, and on your right, under quick links, you'll see forms and documents. So along with appeal forms, we also have other forms, return forms that you may find beneficial. But it is under our quick links, under forms and documents.
From Noel Bogdanovich, she has two questions. Tax increases. If we are homestead, what reflects the 3% freeze?
That's what I was discussing just a moment ago as it relates to a floating homestead exemption. What is capped is the base rate in which the property taxes are calculated by the tax commissioner. So just an extremely simplified explanation. If your property is fair market value is $100,000, the assessed value is $40,000. Let's just say that's the taxable value. And from one year to the next, it goes from $100,000 to $200,000 in fair market value with an assessed value of $80,000. The floating exemption says that your assessed value for tax purposes cannot go up more than 3%. So in that example, instead of your assessed value going from 40,000 to 80,000, it would go from 40,000 to 41,200. Again, that's the mechanism whereby taxpayers are protected from spikes in the market. Again, a very simplified explanation, but I hope it helps to get the point across somewhat.
Cindy Green would like to know, if my home needs 80,000 plus of repairs, can I appeal the proposed value as long as I have appraisals?
Can I please answer that? Okay. If the home needs $80,000 worth of repairs and you have appraisals, probably the most compelling information or evidence somebody could present is an appraisal, particularly a current appraisal. Don't need to see the appraisal from when you purchased it 20 years ago. Also, as a part of this question, if the property needs repairs, that's a concept called cost to cure. So if the person has contractor estimates, they can submit that as well, and that would be considered in the appeal evaluation.
One of the participants would like to know, the fair market value of our property cannot be compared to a home that sold last year, and that has, excuse me, that one disappeared on me. Oh, excuse me, and that has all new kitchen, bathroom, etc. We do not have that. How can that be shown during the appeal?
Yes, actually, I was hoping that question would come up. We actually can compare it to the concept again called cost to cure. If the properties in your neighborhood have been upgraded, let's say the property sold and it had $50,000 worth of upgrades, then the typical house minus 50,000 would be the non-renovated house. So the idea is the properties around the community are always impacting the value. We're looking for comparable, not identical, but comparable. And that's one of the reasons why we have the appeal process. We can make an adjustment. One party might think this warrants a $10,000 value reduction. The owner might think it warrants a $50,000 reduction. And that's why we have the appeal process. But thank you for that question.
So another one of our participants, on the assessment, where is the line item for Fulton bonds?
As you may recall, what we was talking about regarding some of the pieces of legislation, where you were maybe familiar with seeing that line item due to the new law, that would not be reflected on your notice any longer.
All right, so we have two participants who have their hands raised. Charles Krieger. I think
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So actually, I had typed out the question, so I'll just read it. It's a two-part question. First part, how come homeowners are expected to keep their budgets balanced, including their payment of their taxes, but the government seems to constantly increase its requirement of more and more of our money? Does it never reverse? Why is the government never shrinking to allow the homeowner to keep more of their money? And the second part of the question then bleeds into that, which is, provide me with a mathematical reason, not a progressive reason, not a governmental reason, a mathematical reason for why my property taxes go up when the value of my house goes up. I do not magically require more service from the county because the property value increases. The county does no more for me than it did before. If the value of my house goes from 250 to 500, it doesn't change what the county has to do for me. What is the mathematical justification for increasing my taxes?
I guess I will answer that. So every year, which this year will be August 6th, we should set a millage rate. And in the past, we hope that we can roll back the millage rate. So if your properties increase, we would roll back the millage rate. So you won't see an increase in your taxes. Currently right now, tomorrow we have 2 hearings, the first 2 of 3 hearings tomorrow at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. at our meeting to have hearings for the millage rate. The advertised rate is to go ahead and raise a full mill instead of roll back the millage rate. I'm personally against raising your taxes. So I hope that people like yourself, Charles, will come and speak at our meetings to try to encourage us to not increase your taxes by a full mill. As you all know, we've had a lot of expenses. Our sheriff has been very, very costly with the jail. We have basically our public safety partners have really driven up their costs lately in running their offices. And by law, we commissioners have to fund their offices. So we're trying to keep things in control. I would love to have the tax rate rolled back so nobody sees an increase in their taxes. But at this time, it's uncertain. So I really encourage all of you you can attend the meetings in person at 141 Pryor Street at the Government Center, or you can do it virtual by registering for the Zoom. And we'll have that information at the end of this meeting for you to register.
So we also have Maria Guadio, who would like to speak as well.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. There are many counties in the area that once you turn 62, you no longer have property taxes or you no longer pay school taxes. For example, Cherokee and Cobb, and there are many others. It doesn't seem to be a matter of legislation of the state. It's whatever the county chooses to do. I'm not sure who answered that question earlier, but I would like further explanation of that from that gentleman. Second of all, I have applied for homestead exemption again back in March, and on my tax I don't get a rejection. It just homestead exemption, it's blank again. It's just blank. It's like I wasn't accepted, even though I got a computer printout, which was several pages. So why is when I make an application for the exemption, why doesn't it translate to this Fulton County tax assessment notice?
Yeah, you can reach out to me specifically about your particular homestead exemption, and I'll be glad to review it for you. Again, I'll put my email in the chat, and you can reach out to me, and I'll be glad to research it for you.
Thank you.
You are correct that each county plays a part in determining which local homestead exemptions are applied in their county. So as you alluded to, some of the surrounding counties have homestead exemptions with certain specifics about them that are not also in Fulton County and vice versa. When we're talking about the state floating homestead exemption, that came about so that every county, all 159 counties in the state of Georgia, now have a floating homestead exemption. Fulton County, by and large, has had a floating homestead exemption for a long time. Some of the municipalities over the last 4 or 5 years have added them as well. The question there, of course, is which one benefits you the most? And that's the conversation that we had early on in this presentation, that if your homestead exemption is already established, you've already filed, it's already been applied, whenever that was, you don't have to file again for the state exemption. There's simply a comparison done within our system so that you receive the benefit of the exemption that benefits you the most. For most people in Fulton County, it's likely going to be the exemptions that they already have in terms of the Fulton County floating exemptions that already exist. But that's not to say that there could not be situations where somebody would benefit or benefit more from the state exemption. I don't know if you're able to write it down, but my email address is james.whitman, just like it says on the screen, james.whitman@fultoncountyga.gov, and I will put it in the chat as well.
Thank you.
Right. So our next question, how are
Ms. Waller, do you mind if I add one comment to that previous question, which is that I did want to mention that it is the Georgia General Assembly that would need to adopt any that introduces laws to create property tax exemptions, such as what was described. That is not Fulton County government is not able to set the property taxes for the school board. That first of all, the school board is a separate government, and that the General Assembly would be required to take any action of that nature.
Thank you. Our next question, how are homestead exemption numbers calculated?
That's the question for Dr. Ferdinand. They do a fantastic job of calculating taxes. That doesn't necessarily fall in the realm of what we do. Our responsibility as the tax assessor's office is to receive homestead applications along with the documentation that will help us to determine which homestead exemption you qualify for and which best benefits you, as we have discussed. And then we apply the appropriate code to your property to correspond with that homestead exemption. The actual calculations themselves and the billing and collection of property taxes is the responsibility of the tax commissioner's office. Again, they do a fantastic job. It's a very sometimes detailed and involved process, but they are the subject matter experts as it relates to that.
Pam Walker.
I would like to just comment on that a little bit too. We've had a lot of questions with tax assessor and tax commissioner. I think we'll hold another virtual town hall once the tax bills come out, and we'll have our tax commissioner, Arthur Ferdinand, on the expert in that area to go over the new tax bills with you, because I think they're going to be significant changes on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Pam Walker wants to know, how does an assessor take into consideration price increases of homes in the same neighborhood due to upgrades the buyer chose from builder?
Well, I'd like to address that. If a property owner chose upgrades, we're going to see that reflected in the sales price. And I imagine we're talking about brand new subdivisions, but we're going to see the difference because in typical fashion, most subdivisions are relatively consistent, and the ones that are upgraded, we see it because they sell for more money.
Ed Sally says that his assessment increased by 150% over 2024. He wants to know, does he need to find sales comps that occurred in 2024 as part of his appeal? Also, is there a limit on year-over-year assessment value?
I would say yes, you do need to find sales comps that occurred in 2024, January 1st to December 31st as part of the appeal process. To my knowledge, there's not a limit on the year-to-year assessment value, because quite frankly, that would dilute the very purpose of the ad valorem system. Now, there was a similar question that somebody else had posed earlier. Is my market value went up by 40%? The amount of change is not a ground of appeal. The value itself is. My value went from 1 million to $1.4 million is alarming, but that in and of itself is not indicative of a problem. My property value is 1.4 million and houses like mine are only selling for 1.1 million. That's the conversation you would need to have. That's the conversation to bring up in the appeal process. Not the change in value, but the value itself.
Boris Goldenberg would like to know, what do property taxes pay for?
I guess everything that government provides. So your tax bill consists of Fulton County taxes. Mainly Fulton County, we provide services like our court systems, our public safety, the DA, the solicitor, the marshal, the sheriff, and the jail. That's a big portion of the expenditures by Fulton County. We have an animal shelter. We have 35 libraries. Those are just some of the services. Water and sewer we also provide, but that's a different line item. Your billing pays for that. The biggest portion of your taxes is your school taxes. There is the Fulton County School Board that is responsible for setting that millage rate. I believe last year it was 17.08 mills, whereas the county's 8.87. And then you have your city taxes on top of that as well, which depending whatever city you live in, that would vary. I live in Alpharetta, so mine's 5.73 mil.
How does the 3% increase cap come into play?
Again, I assume that question is in reference to the floating homestead exemption. And so as we explained, the 3% increase, that cap is related to the base year value, the actual taxable value. And so there's no limit on how high the fair market value can go. It should be fair market value, obviously. The 40% assessed value is simply a calculation, 40% of that fair market value. And so it's the base value that should not increase by more than 3% from year to year for tax bill calculation purposes.
All right, we now have attendees who have their hands raised. Craig Coaches would like to speak.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering if you, in the value that you guys arrive at, are you presuming that the basements are completely finished? Is that calculated into the value? Because based on the numbers that I'm calculating on the closed price per square foot on similar homes in my neighborhood, it could only be arrived at if the basement was given the same value. The unfinished portion of the house was given the same value as the upper levels that are finished. And I'm just wondering if that's part of your assessment.
The answer to that question is no. It will impact the value, but it's not going to be at the same level of contribution. The actual model assumes that if there is a basement, that the basement is unfinished. And if somebody were to finish it off, then we would increase that property based on what was done to that basement.
All right. I think we have Danielle Claffey, who would like to be heard as well.
Yes, hi there. Thank you very much. So my question is, with respect to the assessed values, I do understand now that it's based on a 2024 analysis from what you explained earlier. when we're looking at assessed values that I know many of us, I've seen it posted everywhere, I'm sure you all have too, that have in some cases more than doubled in our circumstance, it more than doubled from our previous assessment. How can you explain at all what went into that calculation if when looking at the 2024 comps, they don't necessarily reflect or justify that increase? What else is it that went into it that resulted in a more than double increase in assessment?
Okay. I'm going to court danger with this response. An appraisal, by definition, is an opinion of value, and it is completely fine to have an opinion different from the Board of Assessors. That is literally why the appeal process exists. Now, I would also say that we look at the sales in the previous calendar year, January 1st to December 31st, and based on those sales, we make a projection. The properties that sold, we know what they're worth. They're worth what they sold for, but we use the ones that sold to come up with a projection for everything else. Now, this system works fabulously if you're dealing with a condominium complex, townhomes, subdivisions where everything is built by the same builder to the same quality, very similar, homogeneous. When you're dealing with properties that are different from one another, then the findings can be skewed. There are some parts of Fulton County, you might see the 1950 year-built brick ranch sitting on 2 acres, and the next door neighbor might be the 10,000 square foot brand new mansion sitting on 10 acres. But we try to make a variance between those 2 properties. So the answer to that question is, yes, it's about our opinion on the findings. It's possible that the sales in the area may be of one type of property, but not necessarily representative of everything else, because the neighborhood itself could be different. Thank you for that question.
I will also add that assessments, by definition, are somewhat nuanced, meaning there are some that may have been successful at filing an appeal in previous years. And so they are subject to that 299C provision, meaning their value does not change. And so after that provision is expired, they may see a different spike in their or a different level of assessments or increase in assessment in their value than, let's say, their neighbors. So that may be one nuance that impacts your assessment.
One of the attendees would like to know, do we need to apply for basic senior exemption if we already have basic homestead exemption? Is it applicable when one of the owners or all of the owners reach the age requirement?
Yeah, we do not currently have a mechanism where we upgrade a homestead exemption from the basic to the senior exemption based on an age requirement. And so if you have a basic homestead exemption and you've reached one of those age milestones, some of those again are associated with income. I know at age 65, we have a basic senior exemption where income is not a factor. The only factor there is age. But yes, you do need to file for that additional exemption. And again, you have until August the 1st, if you received your June 17th notice to file for 2025.
Mr. Whitman, what documents should people bring with them if they'd like to apply, or should gather if they want to apply online?
The primary documents are always going to be specifically your driver's license and the vehicle registration for the automobiles of the husband, wife, the spouses of those that occupy the home. If they are specifically wanting to address not just the age, but the income, then again, those state and federal tax returns are required in order for us to determine whether or not you meet the income levels that accompany those specific exemptions. Obviously, if your income is over, but you're 65, then of course you would receive the basic senior exemption, which is age related only.
So Mr. Whitman, I hope you don't mind me translating some of that into plain language,
Go ahead.
which is if a person they start at 62 and up, if a person might qualify, it might be worth their time to bring those documents or prepare the documents, including their tax returns, and talk to your office and see what they could qualify for.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're filing online, again, the website is designed, or the online portal is designed for you to just put in all the information that applies, and it is guiding you down a path in terms of the exemptions that you qualify for based on the information that you're inputting. So again, you don't have to know exactly what you're looking for. You just simply have to provide the information, answer the questions as they come to you on the website, and we'll be able to determine from that which exemption benefits you the most.
One of the attendees states, as I understand, the taxable amount cannot be raised more than 3% per year. How does that factor into the Alpharetta taxable value? That certainly has increased more than 3%.
I believe Alpharetta also has a floating homestead exemption. If I'm correct on that, I think theirs is 3% as well. But in regards to your particular property, again, if you'll reach out to me, I'll be glad to take a look at that for you and see what's going on there.
One attendee states, I assume we aren't protected from the commissioners if the majority wants to jack up the millage rate, unlike the appraised value of the home.
You are protected from the commissioners. Basically, you need to through voting, you have control who you elect as commissioners. So I guess, please vote commissioners in that want to try to keep your taxes low. I guess that's my only answer.
Another attendee, which millage rate will be used for calculating the property tax, the proposed new rate, or the rollback rate on our assessment?
I do not want to overstep, Commissioner Thorne. Would you like me to take that one?
Well, we're going to approve the actual millage rate on our April 6th meeting. But on your assessor notice, you have the estimated rollback millage rate. So for instance, for the county, you have 8.87. But at that time of this, the county finance team hadn't calculated what they believe the rollback rate is, and that rollback rate is 8.77. We advertised a full mill tax millage rate, so that would be the 9.87. It cannot exceed 9.87 once we advertise the rate. It cannot exceed that amount. But right now on your assessment notice, it will say 8.87, which is the current millage rate.
We have some attendees who have their hands raised. We'll start with Elsie Morris. All right, we can.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I have a question that's been addressed before, but I'm not sure I clearly understand what was explained. I'm one of these people whose appraised value increased more than $100,000, but the assessed value, you said the gentleman said that the assessed value could not increase more than 3%. Am I understanding this right? So it has the previous year's assessed value. I should take 3% of that, and that would give me what the current year assessed value would be? 3%, the previous year plus 3% of it added together would be what the current your assessed value would be, and that's what my tax would be based on? I'm just not clear on this.
Sure. Yeah, the assessed value is always going to be 40% of whatever the fair market value is.
Right.
It really depends on when you actually applied for your homestead exemption and when it was applied as to what the actual base year value is.
Years ago.
Yeah, so the base year value, I believe by law, is the year prior to the year you actually applied. That base year value can increase up to 3% year after year. It's either, sometimes it's obviously less than that, but typically, especially in a market like we're in now, where you're seeing property values increase at such a rate as they have over the last several years, you're typically going to see the full 3%. And so even though that fair market value may continue to rise, and of course the assessed value is always going to be 40% of whatever the fair market value is, that base rate that was established when you filed your homestead exemption cannot increase by more than 3%. Now, the only caveat to that is if you did something to your property, add additional square footage, those kind of things that would add additional value outside of that. But typically, when someone has not made any or major changes to their property, the increase from year after year is going to be up to 3% on that base value, again, that was established when you originally applied for your homestead exemption.
So you're saying I have to go to the tax records and see what the value was when I purchased my house, or the year after when I filed for the homestead exemption?
No, you don't have to do that. We can identify that for you. In terms of actually calculating the tax bill itself, again, that's not necessarily a function that is our responsibility, but in terms of being able to identify that base value and what it is year after year, we can readily identify that for you. So just reach out to me and I'll be able to follow up with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Ping Tan, who would like to also make a comment. All right, we will go on to the next attendee, Track Morton.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I thought I was already on speaker. Okay, I have three hopefully quick questions. One was addressed, but I don't know if I didn't hear it all or it wasn't completely addressed. In terms of the senior exemption that was explained, the other part of it is like if there are multiple owners, that age, does that have to be all the person reach that age, or one of the owner reach that age, then it starts to apply? That's
all the owners do not have to be, for instance, age 65 in order to receive the age 65 homestead exemption.
So just as long as one person starts to meet that,
as long as they are an owner, their name is on the deed. That is correct.
Okay. All right. So the second thing is I keep hearing about the CPI like caps at 3%, and I know it's a crude thing, like it's not like exact, but like if I have received things that's like significantly more than 3% increase, how do I know like if it's calculated wrong? Like, because the statement, I hope the statement can show clearly how that is calculated and applied. But without that, I don't know how that is reached, like the numbers.
As we were indicating, the actual assessment notice itself is governed by the Department of Revenue and the state. We don't have the ability to change that notice. Obviously, I think some of the things you're alluding to could be beneficial to taxpayers in terms of understanding that calculation. But essentially, as it stands, it's a calculation that is done within our system behind the scenes, for lack of a better way to say it. But
So,
we can obviously show you what those, at least from our vantage point, what it looks like in terms of the value year after year, whenever that CPI or that floating exemption is applied.
okay, so if there's a significant more than 3%, where do we ask questions? Like, like if we question about that, where should we call to ask that?
You can obviously reach out to me about it, about your specific situation, and I'll look at it. It is a question that I do get quite often. It is a complicated process. It's one thing to legislate these things, it's another thing to put them in practice at the local level. And so we try to fill that gap and helping people to understand how that legislation is being applied to their actual tax bill. And I'll be glad to look at that for you.
So is it best to email you?
Yeah, if you would email me, that helps me to keep track of them and easier to respond.
Okay, all right. So, okay, so my last thing is I really appreciate our Commissioner Thorn. I know you are trying to represent us very well. But however, I saw news, about like a potential 12% increase. So what's the best way to voice our objections to that for now? I mean, I know you mentioned about election, and then we can only elect you. You've already represented us. We cannot elect everyone in the Fulton.
Yes, the proposed millage rate is 12.49% increase. That's a 78 million additional revenue that's going to be generated. And I encourage people to either attend one of the hearings tomorrow. There's a 10 a.m. hearing and a 6 p.m. hearing. You can attend in person at the Government Center at 141 Pryor Street, or there's links. I believe there's a link in the chat. Maybe we'll go ahead and send it out again to register for the Zoom. I think she's going to share the screen here so that you can register to attend virtually. I know a lot of people don't want to drive downtown. If you do go downtown, it's cheapest to park on the street with meter parking. The hearing will be at the front end of the meeting at 10 a.m.
If I can make one more comment about the floating homestead exemptions, as there have been a lot of questions about that. If you go to our website at fultonassessor.org and you look under homestead exemptions or exemptions, we have a homestead exemption guide on that page that if you open it up, it's basically a PDF. And on page 12, 13, and 14, it takes you through an actual example of how that floating exemption is calculated.
All right. If you would like for me to continue with answering the questions here, I will provide those for the panel. From one of our attendees, is there more than one age-based homestead exemption that can be applied for?
Yes, we have multiple age-based homestead exemptions at 62, 65, and then also at age 70. Like I said, most of those have an income requirement attached to them as well. But as we mentioned, there's an age 65, which is a basic senior exemption, and the only variable there is the age.
Track Morton has their hand raised, would like to speak.
Hi, my name is Tracy Morton. I'm a resident of Alpharetta. I printed out the appeal of assessment for this year to appeal our taxes, but I don't see on the form where you attach the comps or the properties you're using to appeal your taxes. And I also don't see any instructions on where to submit the appeal.
Mike Fitzgerald, would you know the answer to that question? You're muted.
I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah,
so
I was-
sorry. I wasn't plugged in at that exact moment. Say again, please.
Could you repeat the question, Tracy?
Sure. I printed out the appeal of assessment for my property taxes, and I don't see anywhere on the form where you attach the comps that you would like to use to appeal your taxes, nor do I see instructions on where to submit the appeal.
If you don't mind, Mr. Fitzgerald, I can take that question.
Yeah, do that, Roderick. Thank you.
No problem. Ms. Morton, you probably will not see, and I have an opportunity to place your comps on that form. There's not a place for that to take place. Traditionally, what people do is if they want to also provide comps, they simply write a letter. But we also have the option for you to file on our online portal to make it a little easier for you. You will not have to come down in person, nor have to do it by mail, what we call snail mail these days. But if you want to provide comps, the easiest way is to do it in writing instead of, since there's not an availability to do it on the form.
So can you please provide in the comments the link to the online form? It's
Yes.
it's very confusing on your website, and I'm a real estate agent, so I find it confusing.
Yes, we can put that website, that link in there. I believe Mr. Whitman, nope, Ms. Corbett just did that for you guys.
All right. So we have a question from one of our attendees. How do you prove the cost of someone else's upgrades? There seems to be an impossible task.
Okay, I'll address some of that. We actually do see people's upgrades. Really, if they're upgrading a property, they're supposed to get a building permit for it, and we actually get the building permits from the municipalities. Hopefully, they will be forthcoming with those. So yes, when somebody changes the property and with the permit, we're going to see it. And also, since I have you here, I'd like to go back to the previous question because I've seen this happen in my years of the business. We do have a physical address to mail an appeal in, and also you can bring it into one of our physical locations and you can file online. A while ago, some years ago, I remember having a taxpayer very upset because they emailed an appraiser and they thought that constituted filing an appeal. It does not. There is a specific address on the notice that appeal should be mailed to. And what that allows us to do is actually inventory that parcel as an appeal. If you send an email, it won't go to the appeal status. If you snail mail it and you address it to an appraiser, it will go to that appraiser, but it will not go to our office and be indicated as an appeal. So what's on the notice, that's where to properly address an appeal to. Thank you.
How does your team come up with the value of homes in a particular subdivision and come up with your assessments for all comparable homes?
I have to get that. That is literally the basis of an appraisal. We look at the properties that sold and come up with a projection for everything else. It's called the theory of substitution. So how we get the sales is anytime a property changes ownership, it gets recorded in the courthouse, and we will know to the dollar what anybody paid for a property. if it was recorded in the courthouse. That's how we get our sales basis. And we use those sales to come up with projections for everything else.
There was another question in the chat that maybe you can expand on that one. It said that they're a small subdivision with 17 homes and they haven't had any sales in their subdivision. So what do you do in the event if there are no sales?
If there are no sales at all, you're probably going to see a very slight adjustment just based on the cost approach, because the cost of materials has actually gone up in the market. I don't know if anybody has tried to add a wood deck to their house, but the price of lumber has essentially doubled in the past 10 years. But there's another application of that I'd like to address, because I've seen this a lot this appeal season. If there's a small number of properties in the neighborhood, we like to see about 3 to 5% of the neighborhood sell before we make adjustments to it. So if you have a neighborhood of only 13, 14 properties and only one of those sells, that's going to be about 10%, 9-10%. So essentially, we're looking to see what did sell. Even if the numbers are few, if the numbers in the subdivision are few, then that's going to be the basis.
Where can a homeowner find the comparable sales in their neighborhood?
Hope you don't mind. Hope you all aren't tired of hearing my voice. On our website, you can actually search your neighborhood number. Your neighborhood number is going to be on the notice itself. And if it's not, please call our office and we'll be glad to tell you what it is. And from that, you could literally search on our website all the properties in the neighborhood and then do a from January 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024, and it'll show you every parcel that transferred ownership in that time frame in that neighborhood.
For those no longer showing, can we expect those additional line items to be charged when the bill comes out?
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I would probably suggest you may. The requirement or the modification was just simply to the notice of assessment as it relates to the 3 line items that you're seeing now. As Commissioner Thorne mentioned, there are expected to be some modifications to the tax bill also. And so I can only make that assumption.
Where is the line item for the state exemption?
The state line, go ahead.
Okay, you go ahead. What your guess is.
And so it's, again, by law, it's only going to be the county, the school, and then whatever taxing jurisdiction or city that you live in that will be reflected on the notice. No more than 3. State, the bonds, those other line items that you traditionally see will no longer be reflected on the notice.
When I submit my appeal form, do I need to submit all of my proof with the appeal form, or will there be given to you later?
I strongly and highly recommend submitting everything when you submit your appeal form, because once we receive your appeal, we're going to start working it. And if there's nothing in there other than I appeal, that probably isn't going to get you any results. So put as much information, as much evidence as you can with the initial appeal itself.
Are the tax rate and assessment the same for North and South Fulton homes? For decades, we in North Fulton have been paying a lot more taxes, as we know.
I guess I can take that. The tax rate is the same, for the county. Fulton County Schools, if you're in Fulton County Schools, you'll be taxed the same whether you're north or south. And then each individual city will have their own individual tax rates. As far as assessment values, I think our property values in the north are significantly more, land is more, houses are more, so naturally the assessed values will be higher in the north than the south. We looked at the North Fulton cities. We bring in about 301 billion in revenue. City of Atlanta is like 400, and the South is like 100 and some. So there is a discrepancy between North and South.
You're talking digest values there.
Yes, yes, digest values, yes.
Who determines what to base their fair market value on? The legislature or the tax board?
So, Roderick, when you come up with your, I guess, your guidelines for appraising, is that set by the legislature or the Board of Assessors? You're muted. Roderick, I think you're muted.
I apologize. I was having difficulties navigating my screen to get off mute. Yeah, we are subject to 48.5. That's the, and also the 560. Those are the pieces of legislation that guides us in the process of appraisal. So there's an appraisal manual that guides us through our process on how to go about doing mass appraisal. And so we are, with that guidance is how we set our processes. And as Mr. Gardner suggested throughout this evening, we try to do it by comparable properties. He's also mentioned opportunities of homogeneity, those properties that are very similar, makes our task a little easier. However, we know how unique Fulton County is. And so there are also opportunities where we have to really put on our appraisal hats and try to derive or develop values that are still going to be fair and equitable across the county.
From Eric Grant, our small subdivision has only 14 homes and only one home sold in 2024 at a price that seems unusually high, possibly due to understated square footage in the records. Despite this, all of our property assessments were raised by nearly 100%, far exceeding actual market value. There are several larger subdivisions within a half mile with similar homes and more frequent sales. Can sales data from those nearby subdivisions be used to challenge our inflated assessments?
I'm going to address that. In my professional opinion, you can submit sales from another community. I would not give it as much weight as I would give the sales in the same community. And even if that one sale was the basis of activity, it literally is what it is. So I don't think it could be atypical if there's nothing else to compare it to in that subdivision. So the answer to the question is somebody could submit sales from other communities, but I would not give it the weight that I would give sales from the same community.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
There's a previous question above that where it says that someone comes in, buys a home, does upgrades and flips the home in a small subdivision, then it puts an undue burden on the entire neighborhood to appeal or suffer what would be in reality be an unfair and unjust increase if the appeal succeeds at all. So I guess, is that just kind of unfair consequence of having someone come in and flipping a house and making a large profit and then driving everybody's taxable values up on the other homes?
I'd like to answer that. We actually are going to capture that renovated property For one, if they take out a building permit for the flip, we're going to see that. Also, even if they don't take out a building permit, they've just renovated on their own. When they put it on the market, we're going to see that in the FMLS listing. So we're going to see people typically don't like the tax assessors to take a close look at their property unless they think it's a problem, but they want somebody buying that property to know everything about why that property is so fabulous. So we're going to see that. Now, there is another thing that I'm going to say about the nature of real estate, particularly residential real estate. My last course in graduate school was a course in housing policy analysis. And one of the things that came from that course is actually manifested here in this industry. Somewhat of a trick question, like what is the better property to have? The most expensive house in a bad neighborhood or the least expensive house in a good neighborhood? And the answer is the least expensive house in a good neighborhood, because the superior properties are going to impact that property value positively. So to a certain extent, if somebody renovates properties, that is going to have an impact on all the properties, including the ones that haven't been renovated. It's just the degree to which it's impacted is going to be less.
Why would I go through appealing if the assessed value that gets taxed doesn't actually get raised more than 3%?
That is a great question. I don't think we can answer for you. Each taxpayer has their own motivations on to why they want to appeal. Some is simply, as Mr. Gardner suggested, in fair market value. So when they see that fair market value increase and they disagree, they tend to appeal. But again, that is a personal decision.
What if most of the comps were transferred via deed of gift or have notes, unvalidated deed stamps?
I'll address that. If it's a deed of gift, that's going to be a value or transaction price of 0. So that's not going to be factored in. And the invalidated sales, usually we pretty much validate everything. And I mean validate meaning an appraiser is going to analyze that transaction to see if it's a valid or invalid sale. For those not familiar with the term of validity, the idea behind a valid sale is this a bona fide arm's length transaction? If I see properties in a neighborhood that are selling for $700,000 and I see one sells for 500, I'm going to look at that and ask, why is this property selling for much less? And if I see that the seller was Richard Washington IV and the buyer was Richard Washington V, then I know I don't consider that transaction when I'm making my values for that neighborhood. But thank you for that question.
Some counties, including Forsyth, which is close to us in North Fulton, have no property taxes or school tax for seniors who are 65 and up. Why are we not offering the same to us?
I guess I can take that one. It has to be legislated in. We do have a tax digest in Fulton County that they have not wanted to give those senior breaks, whereas in Forsyth County they have. I know in Forsyth County, particularly in my district, a lot of people move across McGinnis Ferry just to be in Forsyth County and get that tax break. And recently they've had so many seniors that have moved in that are getting that tax break. They're having to implement some other things because it does put a strain on the remaining homeowners in the county. So some counties are implementing 5-year, you have to live there 5 years before you can get the exemption. At the Fulton County level, we're trying to gradually reel in our taxes, and hopefully we can get something legislated in. Jan Jones is working on that. We do have the senior breaks now that are statewide, but nothing on Fulton County's level.
The next question is from Charles Krieger. I appreciate Commissioner Thorne's answer to the first part of my question and would also appreciate an answer to the second part of my question. What is the mathematical reason for increasing the taxes upon my home based on its value? How does the value of my home increase the services I receive from the county, thus justifying an increase in the taxes I pay?
So I would say we have professional finance department in the county. They work day in and day out with every county team and establish the budget. And when they establish what the budget would be for the county services, they submit to the commissioners a millage rate. This year, the rollback rate was 8.77, but due to some factors, they thought it would be safe if we kept it at 8.87 and didn't roll it back. That will generate an extra $7 million to the county. I don't know if you'll see many more services, but you will. We have to have some flexibility because we have a sheriff with a jail, and that jail is under a consent decree, and we're unsure of how much we're going to be required by the Department of Justice to spend in there. There are some inflationary rates that have to be considered as well. Just like everybody else, we still have to pay everybody, and if we're going to retain, we might have to give cost of living increases. So in general, our costs have gone up. And so to maintain the current services, we're hoping that keeping it at 8.87, we can maintain the current level of services.
So we have one of our attendees that has their hands raised and would like to speak. So we'll go to Kristen McCabe. Ms. McCabe?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to address the senior exemption piece, that question that has come up a couple of times. On this November, there will be a senior exemption on the ballot to vote for Fulton County, and it will be 25% at 65. You've had to have lived in your house 5 of the last 6 years and be on the deed. And then at 70, you would receive 50% of your exemption from your local property taxes for the schools. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you.
And I just want to introduce, that's Kristen McCabe. She's on the school board. So she's very knowledgeable in that area. And Jan Jones is the representative that pushed that through to get that on the ballot this November.
Next, we will hear from Lauren Baker.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. My name is Lauren Baker, and I live in Johns Creek. And I am just wondering, I do understand, I appreciate that you guys are limited by the legislature and that there are limits and there's things you just can't do. But I think the practical reality here is that, and I think you're seeing it reflected in the comments tonight, and I'm seeing it on community apps, a lot of people were tremendously blindsided by the substantial increases. And this is, quite frankly, I just can't put my head in the sand on this one. This is not parallel with the actual market values, which is why you have people crying out saying, we've got a 40% increase, a 60% increase. I mean, in my situation, it's looking like it's going to be a complete double in under 2 years of the amount of property taxes that have to be paid on this property. And I am in one of those smaller neighborhoods that has older homes, and there's been a few flips that came in. I would say probably at least 2. And I hear things, what I'm leading up into is I'd like to know, is there more transparency that is currently available on the methods of assessment? Because I think that, we can say a lot of different things, but a lot of people are getting substantial increases on their, quite frankly, I'm not sure if it's the assessed value or the fair market value, but which one it is, I'm not looking at it right this second. But there are, I mean, people are blindsided. That's the practical reality. And the practical reality is also that, you know, we're looking at people getting pushed out of this county because if they're here from older time. I mean, this house originally sold in around 2013 for about $350,000. And the assessed or the total value right this second is somewhere around $850,000. It's an older ranch home. I know that one thing that was said as far as like how the assessments were done is that it's based on the home sales. I'm concerned because if I had not just followed a link on the Nextdoor app, which I don't always pay attention to, I wouldn't have known about this meeting. And there are a number of things I'm hearing tonight that I'm not sure if it's publicly available information. I do plan to appeal, but I'm not even aware that these are the specifics that are being considered when these matters are being considered. And if you're going to appeal, to me, it's borderline due process violations because you don't even know what you're up against. And it does seem to be that you're answering those questions and providing that information, but that's critical information that people need to know going into an appeal so that they can prepare adequately and have an actual chance at significantly reducing I can't remember which one is the fair market value or the assessed value on appeal. Is there currently anything that is more transparent about what's going into that? Will there be more transparency about what those factors are? Because just as one specific example, tonight it was said that I didn't know that you guys assume that the basement is unfinished when doing the appraisals, but then later on there was a conflicting statement that was made saying that basically, if you're looking at the sales of the homes, as far as what's reported public record wise, and you see that there are, I forget the exact terminology or phrasing you used, but there was something to the effect of if it's like basically if it's transferred within the family, that doesn't count as a sale. And you're really looking at the long arm, I think that was the phrasing, long arm transactions for determining the value. I mean, quite frankly, that also contradicted an earlier statement saying that you're just looking at the public record sales of the property, because then in reality, it's not. But then also you said you do look at the FMLS listings. And for example, here in this very old ranch home, I've got a basement situation with tremendous mold damage. You can barely breathe down there. And one of the, basically this house is listed as a 4-bedroom, but I've got tremendous physical property damage in the basement. I've got sinking, like concrete has crumbled. That gets counted as a bedroom. And so in reality, if you're looking at the FMLS, that's going to get counted as a 4-bedroom. When in reality, you also said that you just assume that basements are not finished. This is where it just doesn't seem like there's the transparency that's needed to know what these assessments are being based on. And I think also, I mean, to the extent that you can explain, there seems to have been something that changed in the assessment method, because you've got a lot of people that had tremendous jumps in their assessed values in a year time span, or even just 2 years. And they seem to be blindsided. These were not subtle increases. And so it's just hard to actually, quite frankly, believe that I just don't feel like there's transparency on what has actually been considered. And I think that's part of why you have the problem right now with people being absolutely blindsided and unprepared by tremendous increases that they didn't see coming. And I'd like to know if there is more transparency on the assessment process, and will there be more transparency in the future?
Well, so I'd like to address that. We do have on our page a link for our methodology, but I'm actually going to share with you a good significant portion of it now. When properties sell or change ownership, it gets recorded in the courthouse. The appraisers will review all of the sales for validity. There might be 11 properties that change ownership. One of those might be a gift, leaving it to 10. One of those transactions may be invalid between family members, leaving it to 9. So we base it on those 9, and we look at those 9, we look at the listings and see how our information is. Now, the reason I wanted to address this is because something I've been saying for a good chunk of this week and last week. As a property owner, you have the right to appeal the accuracy of the proposed value, not the popularity of it. And what I mean with that statement is my value went from 500,000 to 900,000. The question we're going to ask is, are homes like yours selling for 900,000? And if it is, then that means 900,000 is indeed an accurate value. Now, if you were to say homes in my neighborhood are selling for 900,000, but homes like mine are only at 650, that is what we need to hear. That is why we have the appeal process. That's why I rather enjoy the appeal process. It's okay not to like the value. Just be able to show what the value ought to be. Not just I don't like it. Not just it changed a lot. It's properties like mine are only selling for this. If a $900,000 house in my neighborhood, but my house is $350,000 inferior to that, so I should be $350 less. That's the argument we need to hear.
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, I wasn't sure if I was still able to speak. Quite frankly, I'm not talking about popularity of opinion. I understand what I don't feel like the question was answered, because really, I mean, even just trying to appeal, it's like, okay, you're saying then appeal it. And I hear you. There's certain realities. I'm not by no means I'm not denying the fact that the value of homes in the area has gone up. That's evident. But there doesn't seem to be any specific answer for why there was such a tremendous increase, especially this year and last year. But a lot of people this year seem to be quite blindsided, and it's not even tracking with the increase that we saw around COVID and throughout. So there seems to be a different approach that's just not being shown. And also, again, there's not, I know you said there's, it sounds like there's a guide online, but there just doesn't seem to be a clear showing of what's actually considered. And even, I mean, quite frankly, just some of the answers to the questions tonight. For example, if somebody did get a building permit to do improvements on their home, is there public record? Do they have to report how much money they invested into the property alongside of that? And do we have access? Is that public record? I don't think it is. I could be wrong.
It is. There's a dollar amount on every permit. And even further, if you were to pull up a property record card of that property, you would actually see not just that there was a permit, but the value of that permit and what it was for. But I like what you're saying, Ms. Baker, and I'd like to offer this. If you were to email me, I think my email address is available. I will give your matter my personal attention. I'll tell you how to do it.
Oh, sorry, I got cut off. I'm not sure if speaking now. I didn't.
Okay.
I got muted, so I wasn't able to say thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And by all means, I've gone through legal processes, and it's just my heart's also breaking for other people who it can be this is all very. I mean, I even know legal stuff, but I don't know this legal stuff, and so it's just a lot for anybody. And I always think transparency and guides and clarity are just so tremendously helpful, because you want to. You just I'm not going for popularity. I'm going for reality here. I think a lot of other people are too. And, I can't fight against the people that I got 2 houses in here that they went nuts on, and they made a lot of money. Good for them. But now there's older homes in here, and we're like, oh crap. So that's just, my heart breaks for anybody in that situation. I don't want to see this community lose people, that have been here because they just can't keep up with the influx of what's coming in and what's going on. We know about the big corporations that come in and buy out properties. We're aware of the problem. So that's where just clarity on what's considered, and because I want to show, I want to know what can we show on appeal? What are those? Because I understand you've got requirements, and if we can just know what those requirements are, what you will look at, what will be considered, you just want to have the best chance at showing what you can show. So that's where I was just wondering if there's anything else out there that gives a guide as to what's considered and what will hold weight on appeal. So, but I appreciate your specific offer to help me individually. That's very kind of you.
Tell you what, chat me your address and I'll have something for you by this time next week.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Quite welcome.
Also in our chat, we have Danielle Claffey, who would also like to speak again.
Hey there. So thank you. And thank you, Lauren Baker, for your comments, because it really kind of put a voice to what is circling in many of our minds. I think we see, you all laying out the factors that go into assessments and this and that, and looking at last year's comps and so on and so forth, when the reality is what I was referencing in the comments is kind of the elephant in the room issue. There are probably thousands of us that have received these shocking more than double increases. And we just want to know why such a stark contrast this particular year versus previous years, when of course the market was showing increases since I think 2021. Why this year? Why is it so different? And is the process for arriving at these numbers, is it automated in some way? How is it automated? Is it a matter of plugging in figures? I think we just want to get to the core of our concern for a lot of us, in addition to whether we filed for homestead or not. But even if we did, why the massive increases? How did that happen? Especially if they don't match the comps from 2024. So I know the response is, well, you can appeal, and that's great, but maybe we wouldn't want to have to appeal. And that's my biggest concern. And I think for a lot of us. Thank you.
All right.
And that's why a forum like this is so good, right? If you bring those things to our attention, that is something that myself and staff can look at. If there's a specific or particular area that you're referencing, provide that to Mr. Gardner. We'll make sure we'll take a look at it and we can reply back to you as best as possible.
So Commissioner Thorne and panel, I was asked to start to wrap things up as we get closer to 8 o'clock, and we're about 4 minutes away from 8 o'clock. But I would like to ask those members of the panel, as well as Commissioner Thorne, to please provide some information as to where those attendees can send their questions, because we still do have attendees that have a lot of questions, and I'm sure they would like to reach out.
Yes, we will have a QR code, I think, where people can register for the hearing for tomorrow. As far as the tax assessors, you can reach out to his office, to Roderick's office at tax assessors, FultonAssessor.org, or call the office at 404-612-6440. And I know you might get inundated with some calls. The questions keep going up. I think we're up at 80 in the chat right now. We are going to hold another one of these virtual town halls. If you guys are willing to come back, that will be July 29th. Hopefully people who don't get their questions answered, who want to speak live, will tune back in on July 29th. Regina, I don't know if you can give us all the questions that are asked, and then we can maybe reach out with some answers to those questions. Maybe we'll answer all of them with some short write-ups. It seems like we need to do a better job somehow of explaining the 3% cap. That just seems to be a recurring question, as well as there's questions about homestead exemptions for individual cities. Maybe we can get that information out to everybody on our own. But for the time being, I want to thank our external affairs team, Rico, Regina, and Jessica. Thank you for attending tonight. Thank you, Roderick, and your whole team. Thank you, Michael Fitzgerald, for being a citizen member on the board and all the time you've put in to answering questions tonight. And then I want to thank my staff. I have Edward Lytlemeyer, he's my chief of staff. I have Daniel He's my special assistant tonight. Gracie, she's my director of communications and my district manager. She works at the Maxwell office up at 11575. Patton, she's my director of community affairs, and she's primarily downtown, but she bounces back between the two offices. Just really reach out to my office too if you can't get through or there's something in particular we can help you with. That's what we're here. We're here to serve you. You're the citizens, and I wish we had more time tonight to answer everybody's questions, but I thank you, everybody who's attended, and we are going to do our best to answer all those questions. And thanks, Jessica, for saying that you're going to pull all these questions in the chat, and then hopefully we can email everything out with the emails that you registered to attend the Zoom on.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll provide you with those email addresses as well.
Great, great.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, Jessica. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.